getting to talk to different Marines and just seeing for them, like when they go to a doctor and doctor's like, here, just take this is going to help you. That if we had all discovered CBD earlier in life, if they'd still be around now and they wouldn't be drug addicts, they wouldn't have lost all their jobs, they wouldn't be in a mental health care facility because they lost it.
Lava for Good and Stand Together Music present the War on Drugs podcast, Season 2. This season, we're diving deeper into the real stories behind the war on drugs, its impact, its failures, and the people offering a better path forward. Today on the show, Bellator Women's MMA Flyweight World Champion and two-time UFC finalist, 5-year Marine Corps veteran, once a Marine, always a Marine, and medicinal CBD education and access advocate, Liz Carmouche. All right, welcome to another episode of Season 2 of the War on Drugs podcast.
Season 2, yes. This is the season where we actually talk to people, man. And
a lot more people, yeah. Just not just you, me, and
and we actually going to see them.
Yeah. We were in Nashville for this interview. Liz Carmouche.
Yes.
U.S. Marine, once a Marine, always a Marine.
Absolutely.
MMA fighter.
She is definitely a pain specialist.
Yeah.
Like, because we see what she does in the ring. We see what happens in the fight, but also she knows how to dish out the pain.
Yeah.
So she's a pain specialist in giving and receiving
Giveth and receiveth. Yeah.
So if she tells you how to deal with, a good concussed head, you might want to listen.
Yeah.
She knows a thing or two about this situation.
Yeah.
My pain is, that's where my pain is. Joints and self-inflicted. I slept wrong.
Yeah, you're a tall dude, and you take a lot of flights, and you're on a lot of things.
But if you punch me, I am suing you. Yeah. I am
with a smile on my face.
I am not built for that life.
But mental well-being, in particular like PTSD with the military community. We talked about in our opening episode, kind of our State of the Union episode, about how the federal government still, schedules cannabis at the Schedule 1. And so that kind of trickles down on all the other agencies and everyone else because they have to be speaking the same company line. So that means, the VA, the Veteran Affairs, they can't go out and say we know that this is Schedule 1. Like our buddies over here at the DEA are saying that, but don't worry about it. So their whole thing is they cannot treat PTSD with any type of cannabis. They cannot tell a state physician who can write a prescription that this individual has PTSD or something else if the point is for them to get a medical card. So that's how screwed up the system is. And Liz and I touch on that through the interview a little bit, but I think it's important to know that it's not just a culture thing. Like these policies have greater impacts just beyond the criminal justice system because now our health departments, our housing, it gets into are you going to get food stamps or not? Right. Or are you going to get denied because it's in this schedule? Right. Are you going to get your SNAP benefits? All these types of things trickle down because of this. Right. And it's not just because you're in prison. It's because you're trying to make ends meet, or you have children, or you have chronic pain and you're trying to treat it. Right. And so I think that's all the things. And one thing I'll just touch on as well, we think of CBD as pretty innocuous. I think a lot of places, I live in DC, you live in Atlanta, they're in grocery stores or in most places, but a lot of places have started to recriminalize it. One of the reasons is because they don't have the testing equipment to figure out is hemp cannabis or not. And so does it have THC in it? So when they
you mean just testing the product? Or
So say they find something on someone and hemp is legal, so hemp-derived products, so you could have Delta-8 or some sort of thing. They'd have to test to make sure that it's Delta-9 THC, the THC that you have.
Right.
Because that's illegal, but that's not. But who's going to take the time to do that on someone with a dime bag or something?
Right.
It's not so it kind of was becoming decriminalized in places, so now they're trying to roll it back a little bit. And so then that's all these hemp products too. That's what all these things are. And so again, it's all this stuff that hurts these businesses, hurts people. It touches everything, and you don't realize until you just talk to someone and their story, and you're like, oh, that's because of that, or that X, or it's really interesting. So
and I think some of this stuff is down to life and death for our veterans. The suicide rate is high among our veterans. And
I think more people die of suicide than they ever do in combat.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And that's terrible to make it all the way through a conflict and then come and feel, so isolated or in so much pain or so disconnected.
Yeah, your toughest battles are still ahead of you for a lot of those people.
Yeah, and I think the system kind of pushes people towards the alcohol, which, you know, is an issue with our veterans. It pushes people towards the opioids, which is, you know, the addictive way to, you know, temporarily fix the pain. But what are you picking up? You're losing the pain, but you're picking up an addiction that you might not be able to sustain if the doctor cut you off, and now you're looking at black marketplaces for opioids that you wouldn't have even been introduced to.
No, and, you know, particularly for our veterans, the misinformation, like where the VA is not allowed to do that. But, you know, you can go online right now and, you know, it's all searchable because, you know, there's statutes that say like the Veterans Affairs has to put their pharmaceutical pricing and all this stuff. And you realize how many, you know, different antidepressants and opiates and all these things are coverable at very, very low prices to veterans, but things that are missing from that obviously
can't even be talked about. And
veterans are, you know, you hear this anecdotally when you read about it, like veterans, they're allowed to discuss their cannabis use with their VA doctor, but a lot of them are obviously really hesitant to do that because that can impact potentially how they prescribe you or what they think, or discharge positions, and you're retired. Like there's a circle, you know, there's that hidden fear where we're not honest with each other again. And it's to the people, if we're not going to be honest with our veterans, like, do you think you have a chance? Do you think I have a chance?
Right.
Yeah. I mean, you think of veteran, I mean, they're a uniquely vulnerable population to PTSD. I mean, the things that you see in the mind shifts. And you know, the crazy thing is, again, is at least 29 states, you know, categorically say PTSD is something that can be helped treated with cannabis and can be prescribed for it. And then you look at the VA's website and it says, under no circumstances should you treat PTSD. And it's, ridiculous. Okay, what's going on and where is this? Like, can we just be honest? Like, we have apparently medical professionals on both sides saying completely opposite things. Like, what's happening here? And so, you know, it's really difficult to kind of comprehend that, particularly with this population.
Yeah. And I mean, this is the same population that's going out and sacrificing their life for this country.
Yeah.
A lot of times in situations that normal people should not be put in. So it's not benefiting them in a way that you're prescribing it to.
Exactly. I mean, we talked to Jesse Gould last year, who was, you know, a veteran, and talked about that. He went to the VA and it was a bunch of pills, and he was doing pills and booze, and he had to get out of that. He went a different route. No, you should check that story out because it's amazing, where he goes to Peru and does a ayahuasca trip.
And just did it figured it out on his own, like not even a psychedelic dude.
It's a really amazing story, but it's that thing when he talked about, you know, that's the same story for so many veterans, and so many of them don't get the opportunity, as we know from suicide rates and things that we talk about, that to actually try to figure this out. And it's just a lot more of those stories. So for every, you know, Jesse Gould and Liz Carmouche of people that, you know, we see thriving and being able to utilize these things and try these, you know, there's so many other stories that did not go this way. And that's, but yeah.
And I think also Liz is not a person that runs from anything. She's not scared of anything.
She runs at you.
Right. And you might want to run.
Yeah, you run
But she's laying out everything that she's seen in her experience. And I think that's what we focus on a lot this season. Everybody kind of gets to tell you from their perspective, and it's not just a perspective of you're in the house and you're regurgitating what you've heard from other people. These are people's lived experiences. This is what people have been seeing, what they've been shown, and what they've learned. And if we're not going to come back with the knowledge from what you're learning, then what's the point?
Exactly. Yeah, just to hear someone at the top of their game talk about, I have taken everything, I have the whole world in front of me, this is how I treat my pain. And that's a story I think a lot of people are going to get a lot of value at. So we can't wait for y'all to listen to it and check it out.
Let's go. All right. We're back. Right now we got somebody very special guest, Liz Carmouche. Am I saying it right?
Yeah,
I want to make sure I'm saying it right.
Yeah.
I seen what you do in the ring. So, no, MMA fighter, Marine, former Marine. Come on, man. We're glad to
Once
have
a Marine,
you.
always a Marine, though. Yeah, too.
It never stops.
It never stops.
That's what's up.
I told my buddy who was in the Marine, he did a couple tours, and I was like, we have Carmouche coming on. He was like, oh, hell yeah, hoorah. Like, she's a badass. So now he was super pumped. Yeah. Really, thanks for being on the show. Yeah.
Oh, thanks for
I appreciate it.
Yeah, and I feel like you got so many angles to this thing, and you a big advocate for CBD. I think we'll try to get into that a little later, but
yeah, absolutely.
Just take us through your journey, like your story. If I'm not mistaken, you grew up in Japan, parents in the military.
Kind of, yeah.
Okay.
So my dad had been in the Air Force, but my parents split. They got divorced. I was in Japan from 3.5 till 20.
Okay.
And so lived off base, worked, went to school, did everything off base. But a lot of the interactions we had was on base. And I got to see all the different branches. I got to see who they were as they carry themselves as an international representative, right? They're representing the United States in another country. So I got to see how each of the forces carried themselves there. I got to see their side when they were with the families and who they were within a family environment. I got to see them do physical training and see like who is the highest standard. And like every time it always shone through, it was always the Marine Corps for me.
Yeah.
Like whether it's doing something out in town, everybody parties, you're 21, these are young Marines, but you see somebody get a little too drunk, they pick them up, put him in a taxi, take him home and make sure he's safe. And then I watch Air Force like fall into the streets, cause an accident, see how it does with branches. I'm like, I don't know if that's for me.
right.
And then like physically, like when you think of how sharp a Marine Corps uniform looks, like to me, it's the most badass uniform. It looks so cool. And it's just, I always saw them carrying themselves. And I just knew that education school wasn't for me. I love learning, but doing it in an environment where I have to like sit in a classroom, be forced to learn certain things is like, I'm not that kid.
Yeah.
I'm not that kid. And I knew that about me. And I knew financially too, for me, athletics is something that I had a passion for, but financially it just wasn't a place for my family. It wasn't something we'd be able to afford to go away to college and to be able to pursue that. So the military really just fit every mark for me. And that brought me to the United States. When I was in the Marine Corps, I started to learn about MMA, fell in love with that, started just doing workouts and challenging myself, trying new things. And then when I got out, it was like day one of officially being out of the Marine Corps, I started training. And it's almost 15 years later and I haven't stopped.
Wow.
Did you have that moment of getting punched in the mouth the first time being like, all right, I didn't like that, but I can deal with it? Was that in UFC, Marines, before?
Probably so I definitely got in fights as a kid.
Yeah,
like
okay.
I was just like a tiny little kid. And I was just raised to think that everybody has a right to play sports. And it doesn't matter if you're a girl or boy. And my dad's like, hey, you're stronger than most kids. You actually need to dial it back and be nicer. And very protective over my younger sister. She was like teeny tiny and frail. And then once it was a part of the Marine Corps and we're like learning how to kind of where to direct this and do things, like, wow, this is really fun and really cool. Like I can take a hit and nobody wants to take a hit. Nobody's sitting there like, this feels good. Nobody does that.
Yeah.
Right.
But you realize like, hey, I'm actually a lot tougher than other people. I'm not crying about any of these experiences. I got a pugil stick to the face and fell off the barrier and I'm on the ground and I'm ready to get back up. And so I think I learned there that, like physically pushing myself, that I could take a lot more than other people. And I like challenging myself to the maximum and physically in every way possible. And then once I got into MMA and I had like my first sparring sessions, I think it was my first week ever of training. Like I probably started like on a Wednesday. Fridays are usually known for every single class being sparring classes. And I show up and it's like, hey, you got the heavyweights and that's who you're going to spar. I'm like, okay. Like weight classes wasn't a thing to me. I didn't understand. So I'm like, yeah, you told me to do this, I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
And it's like coming out, my nose is busted, my hair's ripped out, my shirt's torn. And I was like, cool. They're like, yeah, we'll see if you'll be back on Saturday. I'm like, well, at that point, I'm also a Marine. Like if you tell me like, come back tomorrow, I'm going to do whatever you say. Hey, go jump in front of that car to help you train. Like, okay, I'll go jump in front of the car. So they're like, we'll see you tomorrow. I'm like, okay, I'll see you tomorrow. And they come back like, most people don't actually come back. And I was like, you told me to, so I'm here. Like if you tell me to do 8 hours back to back, I'm gonna do 8 hours. So I just found out that that's what I love doing. And more than anything, getting hit is out of it. It was just the learning experience of, I love that in MMA, it's not checkers, it's chess. Right. There's so many pieces in the board that you have to learn. You have to understand all of them. And that's the same thing. Like you're learning how to do boxing and Muay Thai and wrestling and judo and all of it. And then how to combine it all together. And I love that it's so challenging and engaging and pushing me intellectually, mentally, and physically that it's just addicting. And I just couldn't help it, just keep coming back for more.
You've gone through things in your life where everything is about like physical thing, injuries can happen. I know with my work doing criminal justice policy, where we see a lot of people actually kind of lead down a place of pain management where it goes to a place of potentially opiate addiction or things is after an injury. Where I know when I was working on resentencing for a gentleman who was in the Marine Corps, he tore his ACL in Iraq and got, strung out on pain pills and had a fake gun in his pocket, tried to rob some CVS once they cut him off and had addiction, it's that sort of thing. You said relatively pain-free, but you see that. Can you talk about some of the, I guess, the things that you have seen in your career, either to you personally or to other people around that, where you've seen the way that our system works, what we prohibit and what we allow, and what we see as kind of okay and what we don't, how that actually leads to pretty negative consequences for people, not just for their careers, but their lives as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when we talk about injuries, right, you're already going through, combat sports put so much wear and tear on your body. It's inevitable. Even if you come out without injury, like you have less cartilage,
right?
You're strained, you're taking little bone spurs, which are like micro fractures, and that just calcifies, like there's things that are going to happen and you just can't get around it. Then you talk about the fatigue, the soreness, right? Concussions and how that alters everybody. Like I can remember one of my training partners, he got knocked out one practice and comes back to, and we're like, hey, do you like her? I said, no, I want to keep going. And just a lack of knowledge, right, to understand. And so the coach was like, he said he's good. Now understanding, like, that could have been 2 concussions back to back. He's dead. Like he goes home, he doesn't wake up, right? And then you start to see like more and more he's altered. He's not sleeping as well. He's having anger issues. He's stealing and getting involved in alcohol when he never touched alcohol before, getting involved with drugs, right? You definitely see changes where people are like getting speeding tickets that never, and they were safe drivers and all of that. Seeing injuries where somebody who was a clean person got surgery, had never had opiates before, and they give them to you like, hey, here's a bottle of 25, and they advise you, like, you don't have a nurse that's staying there to help you, right? So you're trying to limp around your house, or you're trying to like grab stuff and you only have one arm and you're limited. Nobody's regulating everything. I'm like, here's the bottle. We'll see you again in a month. And they taste it and they're like, whoa, this is kind of cool for the people that like it.
I can function.
I feel really good. Now nobody, I didn't really listen that much because I'm just coming out of surgery, and somebody said like, hey, don't drive when you do these. Right. And they feel so good they go out driving. You definitely see
like you don't feel pain for the first time. Yeah, right.
Yeah, somebody makes a small mistake and that alters the course of everything. I saw a fighter who was young, and again, he had surgery. He just come out, nobody was there to help him. And he does exactly that. He drives, he gets a DUI. Because he's on pain meds, driving under the influence, and he didn't realize, like, I guess it is on the bottle, but I was kind of out of it. I didn't listen to anybody, and then loses his job because of it, loses his license because of it, can't go to his job, right? And then loses his apartment, and then just goes downhill from there. The fight career is over. So the one thing that he was passionate and loving goes away from him. And you just see their whole life go off course. And people aren't advising you on alternates. Like, yeah, cannabis can be a great alternate to that. So you can do something that's going to remove the pain. Like I've had surgeries, and thankfully, like I hate opiates. It makes me feel so sick. I don't like how my body feels. So I wean myself off. They're like, all right, cool. So you're going to do this much? I'm like, no, I'm not. I'm just not going to do the pills and get rid of it and take it into the clinic and like give it to them. I don't have to take these. So thankfully for me, I don't like them. Right. And I'm fortunate, but that's not so many other people that struggle with that.
And so many people find out they like them in a situation where, it wasn't even like they would go, something they wouldn't seek out. They had a surgery, they had an injury where they're like, here, take this instead.
Yeah.
And so, it's just automatically come out of it, and nobody's even recommending other options. And I very quickly weaned myself off of it. And I was like, I don't want to take this. I don't like it. Thankfully, my mom came out, and she'd been a nurse, so she helped me. And she's like, oh, you need to take this much. I'm like, I don't want to. So she's like bringing me pain meds. I'm like sneaking them in a napkin and just like throwing them away and not telling her.
Yeah.
Right. And then she's like, okay, cool. We can kind of like dial it down and reduce the hours. I'm like, oh yeah, I already stopped taking it. She's like, what? I'm like, yeah, I stopped taking them. I don't take them.
Yeah.
She's like, are you? No, but I'm giving it to you. I'm like, yeah, I've been throwing in the napkin, throwing away. Like I don't take. So I was super fortunate. And then I started getting into CBD because I really wanted to remove the pain. I wasn't there was still pain there, but I was like, okay, this is much more manageable, and I feel more in connection with my body. And when I went into the doctor and they're like, hey, everything's looking great, how are you doing on pain? I'm like, yeah, I stopped taking the pain meds in the first week. And like, well, you can't do that. I'm like, well, I did.
Yeah.
And like, well, how'd you manage the pain and the inflammation? Like everything looks really good. I'm like, CBD. They're like, I don't think that does that. Mind you, this is 10 years ago.
Okay.
Right. And they're like, yeah, I don't think so. I'm like, well, that's the only thing I'm doing is I'm doing CBD for pain and for inflammation. And I've done all the other protocol you guys have said, but it's CBD to try and do things. And mind you, had I known more about cannabis, I probably would have used that as an alternative because there was still a lot of pain and a lot of sleepless nights trying to get through it. But I'm just like, I'm just not, I feel so sick on giving the pain meds that they gave me. It's just not even an option. But trying to like argue with the doctor about like, I'm not going to do pain meds when that's all they're advising you to do is do that. I was like, why am I having to argue about my care? Like you on this bottle also says like risk.
Right.
It could have all these side effects and they give you a printout of all the bad possibilities. I'm like, you're giving me something and there's like 29 things on here that could go bad. One of which is death.
Right.
Like,
And
and we
it.
know like the addiction level for people. Why would you push this on me? Why do I have to argue about not taking this and tell you that like you can prescribe it to me? I'm not going to get it. And I can remember like I had another surgery and I come out there. I'm like, hey, I don't take pain meds. They make me really sick. I don't like them. And I've learned how to deal with the pain. They're like, trust me, you're going to want to take it. I'm like, I'm not going to. And they're like, you cannot do the surgery and finish it off if you don't actually take this prescription. I'm like, so I have to pay for a medication I'm never going to use. And I told you guys, and I'm like, we'll just give you a different one that'll agree with you better. I'm like, no, it's not. I don't want to do this.
Yeah.
Like, I'd rather not. And they didn't even give me an option.
It's pretty remarkable. Like we are almost like forced into these buckets and you're not allowed to do the other things. And so I'm curious with your journey with CBD, what was that first experience with it? Were you always kind of, hey, I always think this could be something interested. Were you skeptical? Just curious your thoughts and how did you change over? Yeah.
Yeah, I was super skeptical. My mom was pretty open about her cannabis use, and she's like, "Yeah, I like pot. I was born in the 50s. I've lived through 60s and 70s. I think you can have a healthy relationship with it." I'm like, cool. I'm like, it's not for me. And then I joined the Marine Corps, and it's not an option.
Right.
Yeah.
And so the only thing I knew about CBD was THC based. I'm like, yeah, guys, I can't. I fight for a living, and I don't want to be high. Like, it's just not of interest to me. I'm good. And one of the guys I worked with, he was a veteran. And he had a big connection with CBD. He's like, no, check out this company. It doesn't have, you're not going to get high by using CBD. And he's like, I was medically discharged from the Air Force. I experienced pain, and this is what I do to help me sleep, to help me go through anxiety, and to help me reduce the pain. He's like, and it helps so much. He's like, I don't want to take pain meds. And he's like, my body is so messed up from being medically discharged. I needed something. And he was a respectable person who was like leading this group that was helping veterans, really professional human being, and a guy I really trusted and liked. So I'm like, okay, he's not a pothead. So, like I'm going to trust him when he has to say about CBD. I started looking it up. I'm like, okay, maybe you can do CBD without getting high and I don't have to worry about stuff. And I talked to the company and I was like, wow, these people, they're not all potheads here. And they're showing me around their business and showing me everything. And everybody is really functioning. I'm like, I think I really misunderstood, one, what a pothead was. And then two, like that CBD and THC aren't the same thing. And so they gave me some product to try. I'm like, I don't know. I'm like, okay, but like I'm having trouble sleeping. Pain's really bad. I tried it out and I didn't expect it. Like I took the dose that they recommended. I'd laid on the couch and woke up and I'd been in the same position because I passed out so hard for the first time in like a month. Yeah. And like my back was hurting because I was like sleeping in a weird position. And I'm like, I slept on the couch. Like I don't sleep on the couch. Yeah. And I'm like, that was like 8 hours ago. I'm like, holy crap. I'm like, and I'm not in pain other than I slept in a funky position. Like I'm not in pain and stuff. I'm like, okay. And I tried it again the next day. I'm like, wow, this stuff actually really works. And yeah, I'm not high. There's nothing else coming negative out of it. I feel really good. I feel like I'm managing mental health a lot better. Physically, I feel better. And because I'm not in pain, I'm sleeping through the night. Like, all right, maybe there was some more truth to this. And I did even more research to try and understand the different types of CBD and all the benefits of it and the difference between THC and CBD. And I was like, wow, this is actually really beneficial. Why wasn't I doing this before? Exactly. Like I would have really fought with my surgeon about not using products like that with opiates and just done this instead. Yeah. Like if I had known, I'm like, man, I definitely had a misunderstanding.
And you're someone in training, nutrition, going out of doctors, constantly being not one person, like let alone someone that's just an insurance agent, kind of then they hurt their knee, like they're just going in and call it a day. They have no idea. I mean, it's crazy. You weren't made aware how much.
You have a higher tolerance or threshold probably for pain. So just imagine other people. Like, tell us what the CBD, how much, I guess maybe give us like a scale of how much it decreased your pain for, or what could people look to like equivalent, like?
I mean, substantially without all the like, when I compared to an opiate, like when I took opiates, I still felt the pain. It was just a different sensation of pain.
Right.
Right. And then it was just
Opiates, it feels like you don't care as
yeah,
much.
like,
It's
like
more
you're
in
not
your
thinking
head
about it.
than,
Yeah. But then also I felt nauseous. I felt groggy, and then I felt bloated, and all these other, like, my sleep was weird and it wasn't good. On CBD, I was clear-headed. Inflammation was reduced significantly, and that was like a big thing too. Is when you train as much as I do, you have inflammation all over your body.
course.
And again, like, I do blood work. My blood work markers will show inflammation levels, and it shows a significant reduction. I'm talking 50% in inflammation markers when it compared to what it had been. Right. So, like, okay, well, that I can clearly see is helping. I can see in a joint, like if my elbow got smashed in and it's swollen, it reduced down. And so if I can visibly see no red inflammation, it's not swollen, it's gone down. Pain wise, I'm not focusing on the pain. There's still a little bit of pain there, but I'm aware of it. It's not distracting me from it, and it still isn't hurting. I can go drive and I'm not impaired and go through. So to me, just an all around much better option than using other things that they give you.
Yeah, no. I feel like you're an expert on it. You've done two of probably the toughest jobs, you know what I'm saying? Salute for the Marine, and then to actually fight in a combat sport. Like,
yeah, so if people are listening at home, they're like, all right, this is Liz Carmouche. She's a Marine. She's a MMA fighter. Okay, that's her. Right. What about just like the typical person? They're going to the gym a few times a week. They're getting that information. Like, this is not going to work. I need more. I'm going to need something else. Like, she can tolerate pain. She can handle it. Like, what would you say to them?
Yeah, I'd say my mom is a prime example. Is like, yeah, she used cannabis and is okay for like smoking weed, but CBD wasn't something she was familiar with. Like the polar opposite.
It's so interesting.
Of like didn't know anything about CBD. And again, she was asking me. She's like, hey, I remember when you had surgery and you weren't taking on the opiates, but you got through it. Like, what exactly were you doing to help that? And she ended up having surgeries too. Like, she had to have knee replacement surgery. And it didn't work. And so she definitely wanted something different because she's home alone. Really easy to just like be so focused on the pain and to get through it. And she tried CBD and she's like, this actually works really well. Like, immediately. I noticed inflammation goes down immediately. Pain wise, it's almost like 15, 20 minutes where I notice a change in it. And she's so like hyper aware of her pain and in such a pain state that, it's my mom's 72 now. She's just turned 73. So like when you have your like 6-year-old mom and she's saying like, oh, I'm in pain, like she's not going to get rid of the pain. That's not somebody you definitely want to reduce it. So when she says there's a difference, to me, that's a big difference.
I agree. Yeah.
Right. And so that's who I notice more. Cause like you said, I've gone through a lot of pain and learned how to, like, to some level, turn that switch off and ignore it to some degree. You have to. And she's somebody who like doesn't turn that switch off and definitely doesn't ignore it and notices it. And CBD changed that for her, and she could notice a difference. And that to me speaks to it.
No, that's awesome. And I think obviously there's ignorance and there's, uneducation on this, and the high, people just have that. And then I think a lot of that is because of our culture and our stigma behind cannabis and CBD, that it's still illegal in a lot of places. There's people in prison right now, for doing things that people are making, millions for and things like that. And so there is this stigma. And then also what happens when you have states that are legal or some are decriminalized, like, you get a lot of, let's just call it bullshit on the market. And so a lot of people's first experience with cannabis is something where they thought it was this, but then there's all this other stuff in it, or they thought they were going to take CBD and they got it at like their, grocery store down the road. And it's like some $5 tub. And then you're like, okay, why do you think this is going to, like, it's getting like a $5 lobster. Like, do you think it's going to be a good lobster? Like, probably not. And so did you experience that? Have you seen people like, I just know that there's a lot of crap out there, and a lot of that is because, there's this stigma around it. And so I'm curious, like, did you have to sort through things that worked for you particularly, or did you kind of have things come around?
No, I definitely had to, thankfully, like I said, with my friend, he helped kind of direct it because he knew the company's producing it.
Okay.
Right. So that made it definitely a lot easier when you get to go to and you get to see firsthand what they're producing and the whole process and what they have. But then once federally everything changed, what was before you had to go out of your way and they only had like good quality stuff out there and it wasn't as popular, to then it being oversaturated in the market where you're like, hey, it's 25 cents for the CBD. I'm like, that's probably not it. Right. But again, having to do research and really see stuff and try things out. I definitely have done things where I'm like, hey, I ran out of my CBD and I made a huge mistake in practice and I got dropped, and because I got my legs kicked out from under me and twisted my ankle, and now my ankle is swollen this big, and I'm not going to go do anti-inflammatory medication. Like, I'm just not that person. I'm not going to take it anymore. I'm not putting my liver through that. And I don't have CBD, so I need something. I'm like, cool, just went to the store. Like, how convenient it's at the grocery store. I'm like, yeah.
Right, yeah.
And I look at it, I'm like, why does it
right.
have 25 milligrams of sugar in it?
Right,
Which is an
right,
inflammatory marker and
Right.
increases inflammation. Like, that's not
right,
going to help me.
right.
So I'm like, okay, not that. And then it's like, wow, I'm having to weed through to see all the junk that's here. Canola oil and CBD.
Yeah.
Right. So it does become very difficult. And most people aren't looking ingredients in their food, let alone their medication, to really discern what's the good, what's the bad.
Yeah.
Right. And then most people too, they're like, hey, I can get my medication for $12 for 100 pills, and it costs me $120 to
Right.
get good CBD. So very quickly people are being like, well, I'd rather go cheaper. I'm like, yeah, but cheaper is going to mess up your body. There's a
Right.
reason for it.
Have you seen people that you're like, man, I wish I talked to them earlier, or kind of like changeovers where you're like, they were doing X and now they're doing Y? Any other examples like that within your career
Yeah.
fighting? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Talking to, because I had been in California for a long time.
Yeah.
And so being on a fighting team and getting to have a lot of military personnel that you worked with, interact with, they knew, they're like, hey, we see you. We know you're not the type of person that's going out and getting high every day. So what are you doing? Because my body's messed up from the military and I'm about to get out. Getting to talk to different Marines and just seeing for them, they're like, okay, that made a huge difference. Like, thank you so much. Like that was huge. And then seeing other people too, where like you said, yeah, like what if those training partners that they discovered for trying to conflict with pain, when they go to a doctor and doctor's like, here, just take this is going to help you. That if we had all discovered CBD earlier in life, if they'd still be around now and they wouldn't be drug addicts, they wouldn't have lost all their jobs, they wouldn't be in a mental health care facility because they lost it. And it's like, yeah, I wish that we had all known better then and there had been this research and been more information
Yeah.
out there, because maybe not, but I certainly hope that would have made a difference
Yeah.
had they had that option.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like I said, when it comes to, you have the option of having a product that's super cheap, right? Like you can get opiates and it's $2 and you get 25 pills that they prescribe you, but you can't be prescribed CBD and you have to spend $120 and you're doing the math like, well,
Yeah.
this is easier. Why don't I just
Right.
do this instead? And then I don't have to
Right.
research and look things up and have to, it shouldn't be that way, right? So much cheaper to get these things that are hurting you rather than something that's helping you.
As far as with the veterans, have you seen like movement from like the top?
I see with the VA that they still fall under the conflict of federal enforcement, right? So because federally we still are in this gray area of what THC, CBD, and everything else can be used, they're not vocalizing any of that, right? And then I do see that there are certain people that really is just based on state to state. We're still in that conflict where I've heard some people where they're like, hey, you use CBD, and there's kind of like, they can't say anything. They just give you the thumbs up.
Right.
And then you can be in a different state where like, no, you can't use that. Those are drugs. And I'm like, whoa, what did we just, like, going from California to Tennessee
Yeah.
and hearing, I'm like, I didn't think that we went back in
Right.
time. And it was just such a different seeing
Right.
it. And the issue you always run into is like whoever's in charge is on a rotation, 2 to 4 years, whatever their term is. You could have somebody who at the end of the term is starting to see differences, right? And evolve with their policies and try and enforce new things and change things. But then the moment they start to make change, their 2 to 4 years is up. Somebody else comes in with a whole different agenda. Maybe they're completely ahead of everything and they're like, I see these involvements and these changes happening, or they're completely against it. And that's always the difficulties when with the military, like even I can remember being in the Marine Corps and we have somebody who's in charge, right? They're in charge of all the Marine Corps. They come in, they're like, our policy is, hey, Marines are allowed to have tattoos, but only like a 3/4 sleeve.
Okay.
Next person comes in, they go, absolutely no tattoos whatsoever. And everybody that gets tattoos gets kicked out. Like, okay, so 2 weeks ago, before you changed, we were
Right.
just, everybody went out and got 3/4 sleeves. We were totally
Yeah.
allowed to do this. So like, yep,
Right.
sorry, you're out now.
Wow.
And something like
Wow.
that really shouldn't have, I understand, but it shouldn't really have a play in things. There are inappropriate tattoos, which has always been the thing, but in that policy, just tattoos is everything from medical, like CBD being allowed. And then the next person comes in, they go, absolutely no
Right.
CBD. You got to be absolutely ridiculous. And so, whereas one person be making changes and making headway in a positive way, somebody else slides in, has a whole different thought process. And so it's really hard to keep up with it because the VA operates for the military. So in that same sense, they're evolving and rotating the same way that the military does.
Yeah.
So it's really hard. And I see a lot of other people, like veterans like myself, that have gotten out and they're trying to go to the VA and say like, hey, this needs to change. Like, these are the benefits that we're having. And they're trying to talk to people. But again, like they're making headway. They're working the way up the structure to talk to more people, talking to the next head above them and above that. But then everybody changes and people are talking before. They're like, yeah, absolutely. We hear what you're saying. You want to make changes. All those people are gone.
Right.
And so it's really hard to make those movements and to make those adjustments. It's got to start from much higher than that to be able to really have an effect.
Yeah, who's the man? Yeah, in this situation.
Yeah.
I think, you know, we're going to have to go to like higher government. We're talking like presidency. We're talking people within Congress, within the Senate. Those are the people that need to make those bigger changes because they're ultimately, it's Congress and the Senate that has overseeing over the VA to make those changes, right? So if somebody changes there, then it trickles down, everybody changes. So I think if we can, at the beginning of somebody's term, get to them and be able to say like, hey, these are the positive effects that we think we can help introduce into the VA, that's when it starts to happen because that's when policies change. And unfortunately, what I see with the VA is it's after so many losses, like suicide within the veteran community and raising awareness on that. You know, like you lose a few veterans to suicide, that should be enough. We should be like, hey, we should do something.
What's going on here?
Not like, hey, years of losing people to realize that what we're doing now isn't working and we need to change things.
Right.
And you were talking about some of the advocacy that's coming from the military community now. And I worked a little bit in Kentucky where Dakota Meyer was someone who worked with a Republican governor to talk about, you know, bringing plant-based medicines there to fight mental health and opioid addiction. Because he said, you know, I'm a Medal of Honor, you know, recipient. I did multiple tours here. I've lost so many more people back home to suicide than I ever did on any of my tours over in Iraq and Afghanistan. When you hear that, you can't just say, oh, okay, moving on. Like that means something.
I think it's simply looking at the numbers. Like if we look at how many DUIs happen, how many, because of people being under the influence, fights, just altercations that happen, violence that happens.
Yeah.
Let's look at those numbers that are involved with alcohol. And then look at all the numbers of these altercations that happen under the influence of THC.
Yeah.
I bet it's a lot small. Most, like we said, most people, if they smoke weed, they have an edible. What do they want to do? They want to veg out and they want to chill. They're not looking to go to a fight. Whereas people can get drunk. I know that I did too. When I was in the Marine Corps and I got drunk, I'm like, yeah, fighting sounds fun.
Right,
Sounds
right,
Like,
awesome.
yeah, absolutely. You want to punch me? Like, cool, let's fight.
Right,
For no reason.
right.
Next day, I'd be like, why did I do that? Like, you're not hearing the people say the same thing. Like, why? I ate too much food. Like,
Right.
If nothing else alone, let's just look at that. Fine, I understand. You want to restrict it. You want to make taxes. You want to make money. Let's just look at those numbers alone about lives lost, altercations, money lost for having to give these people tickets, having to just everything there for violent acts, destruction that's done to businesses because somebody was drunk and under the influence, as opposed to people under the influence of THC. Just compare those two numbers and why would we not say yes to one thing and vice the other?
Exactly.
Yeah.
One, you prohibit that comes in a natural form. The other one, you have to make it into a poison to consume it. And then we say that's good.
Yeah.
It's got to
And it's
crazy.
acceptable. Yeah. Like how often I'm in social situations and I go out and I'm with a group of people and they're like, hey, do you want to drink? I'm like, oh, I don't drink. And they're like, what's wrong with you? I'm like, why is it wrong with me that I don't want to ingest poison?
Poison.
Right.
Yeah,
Like,
literal
I'm
poison.
sorry.
And,
like,
and
one where everyone knows how terrible you feel.
it's
Yeah.
everywhere too. It's everywhere. You can go to the airport and go rent a car.
Yeah.
Fresh off of being drunk in the air, and they'll give it to you. Like,
yeah. Just came to a point where I'm like, you know what? Why am I drinking? Like, what's the benefit? One, I spend a lot of money, and if I'm talking as a fighter, having to be conscious of my calories, like I'm ingesting unnecessary calories. I don't feel good after doing this, whether it's decisions I made under the influence or the next day I don't feel good. So I finally came to a point where I'm like, and then doing more research, I'm like, wow, alcohol is really, really bad for you.
yeah.
But it's so socially acceptable.
Right. Exactly.
And I'm like, man, since I stopped, and I don't even know when that was, but since I stopped drinking, I've never had to like argue with people so much about why I don't want to drink. Where I go to any public event and they're like, hey, I'm like, oh no, thank you, I don't drink. They're like, why not? What's wrong with you? I'm like, I don't want to drink.
Yeah.
Right.
And like, just have one. I'm like, I don't want to have one. It's just one. You'll be fine. I'm like, I don't.
Right.
And I'm like,
very
okay.
strange.
But
Yeah.
I've never like, I've had somebody offer me weed. I'm like, no, I'm good. And they're like, all right, cool. No worries.
Yeah.
Like I've never have to argue about that, but I have to argue my
very
points
interesting.
to
Yeah.
say, no, I don't want to drink. And then
We
people are like,
not gonna push it on you.
yeah.
Do you want to hit this? No, that's a thank you. That means
Yeah.
it's more for me.
But like, and being in events where people are like, I can't trust somebody that doesn't drink. I'm like, really? Because I almost can't trust somebody that can drink.
Right.
Because how often the next day you're talking to someone, they're like, yeah, I don't remember saying or doing that.
Right.
Oh man.
Like that's not trustworthy.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it sucks. I'm like, hey, if somebody wants to drink, that's your choice. If I don't want to drink, that should be okay too. I'm not judging you one way or the other.
Yeah.
And it's not. It's so cultural. It's such a part of our culture now that you're wrong if you don't drink.
Yeah.
I'm curious with sports leagues they've been very similar, kind of the VA, and on the other side in the private sector area, UFC's as archaic, I think people see it. They always are on the forefront of a lot of things on how to make things work. Like you look during COVID, they were the first people to try to figure out how to open back up.
Yep.
And they were very, much more, I think, socially driven in a lot of ways on social rights and drug policy and things like that, and accepting and being open to that.
Yep.
Can you talk about a little bit of your experience, like dealing with mixed martial arts and how you've seen that, and maybe have you seen any parallels to other athletes that you see in other leagues where they're much more restrictive on these types of things or not as supportive? I'd be really curious about that.
Yeah, definitely in the early days, like under USADA, when you got drug tested, it was no THC. There's no drugs of any sort. Even if you're prescribed a medication, like even if you had surgery, you still have to submit paperwork and doctor's notices to say that you're approved to do that. Right. And most of the time you're not thinking, like you just came to a doctor's office, you're like, yeah, I'm going to submit all this paperwork to USADA to get approval to say like, hey, I'm supposed to take this. I was prescribed this. And then that changed to where the only rule was you couldn't have THC in your system 10 hours before your fight and leading up to it.
Okay.
Right. So it was within a certain window. And then talking to another friend that's a professional NBA player, and they're like, yeah, no THC at all, ever. Doesn't matter the time. It does not 10 hours before I have a competition. It's not 24. There's no ever. And like CBD. And now you're seeing, like you said, you can see it as being one of the major parts within the cage where it's on the pad. It's a CBD company. And like you show up to your fight and in your goodie bag where you have like their customary t-shirt and all this stuff, there's also CBD. Like a huge difference between like, we're going to test you. Don't you dare have CBD in your body to, hey, we're going to give you the CBD. I'm like, wait, can I, is this fall in that 10-hour window? Like, am I actually allowed to do this? Yeah. So a huge change. And again, not necessarily them advocating for induction, how it helps you. It's not educating you on how it helps you, but going from it's banned, you're not allowed to have it at all, to now it's a part of your gimme bag.
Right.
You can have it.
Crazy.
It's a huge difference. And that's still not in public sports, right? You're still not seeing it in the major leagues where they're allowed to have these things and they have those same level of a lack of restriction. It's still very much a no-go and they're not allowed to do it, and still in the military too.
Yeah.
I think you would want something that kind of helps out or prolongs the ability of whatever sport or whatever player it is. Like, like, okay, if this dude recovers better with CBD than getting on these opioids, drinking, doing something dumb, like how much of that is a factor? How much, like with anything where you might get a concussion? Like, I wonder how CBD, is there any research on that?
Yeah, there's not research on it, because I was curious about that too, just to see, because if it's reducing inflammation, then in theory, some of the damage that's done from brain damage is inflammation within the brain.
Right, yeah.
Right, so in theory, it should reduce it.
Yeah.
And I know that I'd gotten dropped really bad in practice, like I got a really bad concussion, and tried to do everything from omega acids and trying to make sure that I have my omega-3s, doing everything from healthy fats to fish oils, to all the like lion's mane mushrooms and things like that. So trying to ingest as much as that, doing pressure treatment where they put you in the chamber, right? And then the other thing I did was like, I upped my CBD because I'd kind of fallen off. I was like, oh, no big deal. Like I didn't need it. I'm like, I made sure. And I'm a part of a study that does brain scans.
Okay.
And if you get a concussion, there are markers in your brain. There's not getting it's in your blood. And because you have increased inflammation in your blood, and they can see like essentially scar tissue in your brain that's permanent. It doesn't go away. You get a concussion. It's not like, you just magically heal for it. The majority of inflammation heals, but the scar is there. It's like a cut. Yeah. Like you get cut, it heals, but you still have a scar.
Right, exactly.
It's the same thing. Yeah. So they know if you have a concussion. And when I went in, I did the scan stuff, and they're like, cool. So have you retired from fighting? I'm like, excuse me? Like, well, your brain is just like, it's healing, and some of the scars are not there that were there before.
That's fascinating.
I'm like, no, actually, it's kind of crazy because about 3 months ago, I got dropped really bad, and I had a headache for like a week straight. Yeah. And they're like, no. I'm like, yes. Like, it's not a question. It's not a doubt. Like, I just fought. We scheduled this because I just had a fight, and you have to wait so many, like 30 days before you can go and start doing the testing again. And they're like, oh, wait, you did say that. They're like, your scans don't make any sense. They're like, what are you doing? I'm like, the only thing I can say is a clean diet. I don't drink anymore, and CBD.
Right.
And it's like, we might need to add that as some of the research, because this doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Like looking at it, you're like backwards. You're faster, you're sharper, your scans are healthier than they were last time.
Is that the Cleveland Brain study?
Yeah.
That a lot of the NFL players are? Oh, amazing. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, that's really fascinating.
That's good to know. Like you said, it needs to be more research on that kind of stuff, man. Yeah. Because That's impressive.
And maybe it's just for me, you know, I don't know. Just like I know that, like if we wait until the body and the brain are fully developed and you ingest drugs or alcohol, the likelihood that you get addicted goes down. And the likelihood that you abuse those products also goes down. And then the impact that it has on your brain because it's not forming, because it's already formed. So like your levels, it doesn't compromise. Like you have a kid that smokes weed at 13 and then is smoking weed all the time. Their brain is altered because of that.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Like 26 years old, that's your first time trying anything. Your brain isn't really altered. It still has effects, but not the same.
Right.
So I don't know if maybe just because I had never done CBD, THC, or anything until I was in my 30s, if that influenced it.
Right.
And why it had a positive effect rather than a negative effect, I don't know. And then again, those are other parameters that they'd have to consider when doing that study, is the age and the development of the brain and how that kind of influences
Right. And like you said, your relationship with it, when did you,
Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time today, Liz. This has been
Absolutely,
awesome.
for real.
We don't want to keep your yours long, but just one last quick kind of ending on a note of kind of looking forward. Where do you see kind of veterans access moving forward? Where have you seen where we really need to start focusing? What can people do to help? And where can people get more educated? Just any thoughts that you have kind of on the next 2-5 years, you know, kind of moving forward and access to this type of care.
Yeah, I think for veterans, like it's officers who need to step up to the role more, right? Like most of the people I know that are stepping up and they're approaching the VA and they're trying to make change, they're former enlisted. And it just, one, there's a niche market with the officers where they have such a good community. One, they're at the top, right? So the top is going to make connections with other people at the top and be able to speak off. Like you aren't seeing senators and congressmen, they're former enlisted, they're former officers. Right. So in that same sense, if we can get the officers to speak up and to make the differences and to approach, whether that's enlisted personnel, former enlisted that talks to them, but it's the officers that need to use the connections that they have to be able to make the change and to reach out to their congressmen, their senators, the higher ups that they have that are in charge and leading the way to be able to start implementing these new policies and making new change to help the veteran community.
Awesome. No, that's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, no. And we need that. We gotta treat our veterans better. Like you said, like we gotta people that put in, willing to do that sacrifice, like they deserve all the, you know what I'm saying? Like they deserve the best when it comes to treatment and like their mental health and all that type of care. So yeah, love what you're doing. Appreciate you. Yeah, you're amazing. You a badass. You know this. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, I couldn't do it. Yeah, and okay, this is the last question I have. What's the best way, if I ever get hit in the face, what is the best way to deal with it, and where do I need to go mentally?
Oof. That's where it comes into fight or flight response.
Because I'm thinking flight. I'm thinking flight.
Do
I have a way out?
Yeah. But in all honesty, that's not the wrong approach. You know, like even I've been out in town hanging out with friends, a drunk altercation happens, and they're like, "Hey, Liz," I'm like, "I'm not the bouncer.
Right.
I'm not coming." And like, there are higher consequences for me. There are higher consequences to me for a fight. But I'm like, why do I want to jump into a fight? There's no point in that. I'll just be like, hey, calm the friends. Let's walk out of here. Let's get away for the altercation. I don't think that walking away from the situation is the wrong.
Right.
I think if you're trying to protect somebody, like if somebody attacks your son, try and safely get him out of there if you can and run away. But if that's not, because you're carrying a child. Like I know my 8-year-old son, he's a lot denser than he looks. He's a scrawny little kid, and then you pick him up and you're like, how are you 70 pounds? Yeah. You look like you're like 30 pounds. Right. So like moving 70 pounds is a lot harder than you think it is. Yeah. Right. So like trying to get them out there, like you're going to face situations where you do have to fight. Yeah. But I think more often looking for the safe way to exit that situation is the best way to go. Right.
That's what's up.
Liz, thank you again. Is there a place that we could direct folks at all? Is there any website, anything you want to plug?
Yeah, you guys.
Yeah, I do need to get a website going. I've been saying that for years. I still end up never doing it. From the most part, I'm on Millions, and that's kind of a way that people can help give back to me. And then the biggest source for social media is Instagram.
Instagram? Okay. Perfect. Yeah. And where can we find you on Instagram?
Yeah,
on Instagram, I am Gorilla.
Gorilla. Yeah.
Gorilla.
Gorilla. Yeah.
That's such a badass nickname. That's a dope nickname.
Yeah. Well, thank you again. Yeah, Liz, this is awesome. Guys, check out Liz Carmouche. Go to Gorilla on Instagram to find her. And thank you again. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
thank you.
Appreciate it. All right, welcome back.
Special thanks again to Liz Carmouche.
Yes.
Awesome interview.
Yes.
I didn't I've always heard that Cleveland brain study. I didn't really know what it was about, who was participating. I thought that was like really fascinating, like what she was just talking about.
If that's not enough to get you on board with at least the research aspect of it, at least the trial and experimental aspect of it, I don't know what is.
Yeah,
I don't know. I don't know.
And Liz is like the most like straight level. Being a Marine was like emboldened her by like she was very skeptical of this at first, and she had a lot of the questions I think a lot of people do, like, is it addictive? Is it psychoactive? Is it going to make me sleepy, or is it going to make me tired?
Right. Is it going to change who I am?
Yes, exactly. And those are all valid questions that we don't really have like a place to just like discover and like understand, and being able to talk to your doctor about it or something like that. And so I think that was really important to show, like, I mean, these are skeptics that are coming through the height of their peak control. This isn't someone that's just trying to have a good time. They're trying to improve themselves, better themselves, continue to do their profession, the passions that they love. And I think a lot of people can resonate with that. And I definitely did. And I've talked to my parents about, as they've gotten older, like, using CBD, and they've had those same questions. And so I'm happy for them to be able to listen to this.
Anything that. And like we were saying, is having those conversations, is being able to put it in a way where they can understand it. And sometimes you need to hear somebody else lay it out in a way with the credentials to make it valid.
Exactly. I really just I thought that was such an important conversation to have, because it just, again, it shows not only the things that we know about and have knowledge and capabilities to explore more on CBD and on hemp and what works and what's not. And then we also at the same time have states trying to claw these back. Veterans can't even go to their VA doctor and talk about this a lot. It's just this weird, like, again, complicated piecemeal. We're almost living in multiple universes and worlds, like within this like policy. And it just, again, it's a recurring theme, particularly with cannabis, as like we live in this kind of, again, like the gray area of the world with it. Yeah.
And it doesn't make sense. And I think that's what we're doing a good job of highlighting. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah,
it doesn't. What you're saying, if alcohol is not that effective, if opioids, if you're not looking at that like it's detrimental when you have the facts right in front of you, then what are you doing here?
Yeah. Something Liz was talking about that really resonated was that, with the veterans, it's going to take the officers, and it's going to take those people to kind of like move through. And if you have veterans in your life, you have people that are in the military, they're not getting a lot of this information from the sources that we may think they would be.
Right.
So maybe you could be that, or at least like open up to them and say, like, what's your story? What's going on? Because a lot of people are struggling and hurting and may not know avenues, resources, or anything else going out there.
Yeah. Talk to the people you have in your family and community. Share this episode with them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And Liz also talked a lot about how whenever she would go to the doctor after having surgery or anything, they would try to push her to those pain medications, and painkillers. And she was adamant about, I'm not taking those. I do CBD. This is how I recover. And just how important it is for the medical community to study this or take her seriously. She said she dealt with so many doctors that didn't believe that she wasn't taking them, and that there's no way she could be here with that kind of pain without going to opioid or the traditional go-to painkillers.
Yeah. Again, this is not going back to, some of the roots that we dug in season 1, misinformation about some of the benefits of potentially some of these things or how harmful they are or not. A lot of that research is driven in the dirt, and then it doesn't get researched at places, and we still need so much more research. And like I said, the ignorance of a lot of what CBD is compared to THC and what they do and what they don't, it leads to really bad policy, and it leads to people filing bills to remove the whole thing. And, you're like, you're going to do this to things that don't even make people high.
Right.
But again, it's the lack of research and education, and it's ignorance. And I think that stems in a lot of the medical, where they are under a guise and regulations on what they can and cannot say about certain things. They can't talk to you about this if they're not allowed to, or that, or this diet. Not even just with cannabis, it's with other things. Like there are things they're allowed to prescribe and they're allowed or not, because those are on those regulations. A lot of that comes from the prohibition that we have on cannabis. It is a Schedule I drug. It is a Schedule 1 drug, and all the other ones are prohibitive. It's MDMA. You need all these special, and it really gets into that. And again, it just makes all of this that much more frustrating when you hear these stories of people succeeding and others cannot because of whatever.
Right. Yeah. Not even given the option.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. And that's why these stories are important, man. Yeah. I mean, to get them out there so people do have the language and the capacity to talk about it with their loved ones.
No, absolutely. Yeah. Thank you, Liz. And again, we're going to keep rolling for the next episode, episode 4. Another amazing kind of unique experience and something that's kind of coming up. We talk about, being California sober and what that means with Marcus King, who is an amazing, I'll just say, Southern rock musician, just overall amazing. We got to interview him here in DC, and then I got to go to his concert. He was playing that night. My wife and I went and saw some of the folks. Just an incredible artist, an incredible story, and one that, again, I think will resonate with a lot of people. Coming from a small town, not a lot of resources out there. What does that look like? And again, you're going to have to listen to it to find out. But this is one I did solo as well, so you're going to learn at the same time.
Come on, let's do it. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, awesome. That's again, special thank you, and that was War on Drugs.
Thank you, Liz.